Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Harrington, and tonight I am going to bring you a story from a friend of mine who I've known for almost 14 years, and it involves a rock throwing incident. And as Bigfoot researchers and Bigfoot enthusiasts, we've all heard the rock throwing stories. Rock throwing seems to be a major component when it comes to Bigfoot activity. A lot of the rock throwing seems to be very random. Hits inanimate objects around you, hits the ground, hits a tree, hits your vehicle, hits your tent, things like that. How many people have been hit by rocks? I'm sure there's probably quite a few. Uh, but this is going to be a story where someone got hit seemingly for a specific reason. Uh, but I would like to get into this story. So I do think you're going to enjoy it. I'm going to show you the location. So I'm going to have to pull up a file here. All right. All right, here we go. This picture here was taken of Shane Carpenter, myself, and a guy named David Soliday. He joined us almost a year ago when we were down at the Chickasaw Park doing some filming, and that was of my original encounter area. Dave is a super nice guy. He's the hell of a tracker. Shane will attest to how good of a tracker he is because they both spent some time on Guy Sandy Creek doing some tracking. And so we are hoping to bring David in a future project where he will assist Shane in some tracking. Uh, but everybody got to know him. Super nice guy. And when I met David, it was back in 2010 at a Honubby conference. And I came out of the building one time, and Dave was standing there with his wife and stepson. At the time, I think his stepson was about 12, maybe 13, very young. And he just asked me, he said, "Hey," he said, he wanted to talk to me about rock throwing. And our Bigfoot, our Bigfoot's known for throwing rocks. And I said, well, from what I knew, yes, you can attribute a lot of rock throwing activity to these creatures and or these beings. So he told me a story that he lived up around Meeker and Oklahoma, and he said that they were out doing some fishing and had something happen. So he unlaid the whole story to me. It sounded believable. He and I became friends. We spent a lot of time together after that. I went up to his location, actually spent the night at his house, at his residence. We have spent time camping on the creek up there where this incident happened. I went to the pond where this thing happened. The incident that I'm going to describe to you happened at a pond. And I'm going to pull all of this up on a map so you can see it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next picture. All right, here's Oklahoma City. Here's an overview of the area of Oklahoma City. Now look off to the right there, and you see a little town called Meeker. This is based outside of that little community of Meeker. So here's a little bit closer picture, and so you can see Meeker there, that intersection there of Highway 62 and 18. And there's a pond or there's a lake, and it looks muddy. So you can see that lake very easily uh, to the southwest of Meeker, and that is Meeker Lake. And there it is a little bit closer. But on this particular picture, I drew a yellow X, and that's the location of where this pond is located that he tells his story about. So I'm going to go in a little closer. Now this here is the area where you come in on the east side of the management area, and you can park your vehicle and then walk in. Uh, so you don't have much access other than foot traffic or ATV. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in to where the pond is. And here's an overview of the pond as it sits right now. Uh, at the time of his story, the pond, the water level was up to where it was up into the brush all the way around the pond. And you can see from the north there, that would be the way you could come in. And so if the pond level was up to here, it would be in the brush all the way around. So he said it was very, very rough to get around this pond. And so there was really only one area that you were free to, to fish or cast from, which was on the north side of this pond. So he, his wife, and stepson, and it may have been a second stepson. So there was two boys there, and very young, and they were all attempting to fish. Now the story behind this is uh, David said that he and his wife had been arguing quite a bit, going through a rough patch, uh, and so they were trying to fish. So couple that with the fact that it was rough fishing, lines were getting tangled up. David was having to spend all of his time untangling lines and pulling a fish off of one of the boys' line, and then while things are getting tangled up, and he said, I'm not going to lie to you, I was being a real ass. He said I was being a real asshole. He said I was yelling. He said I yelled at my wife. He said I was so frustrated. We were going through a really rough stretch, and arguments were easy to come by. And he says I was ate up with it. And he says I was cursing and arguing, and I was being very aggressive. And he said on the south side of this pond, which you can see here is where the dam is located, he said he just heard a movement in the brush. And he said it's not a big pond, but he said he looked over towards the brush from this northern side here where they were fishing, and all of a sudden he got hit between the eyes with a rock. He said it popped him and knocked his head back and drew blood. There was a mark between his eyes where he got hit with a rock. He said he didn't see the rock. He just looked in the direction of the noise, and then he was hit with a rock. He said, I don't think I saw it because there was no vertical movement of the rock. Where a lot of times if a rock is thrown slowly, it'll need some vertical lift and then some vertical drop before it hits its target. But if a rock comes at you with enough trajectory where it's going straight because of the power behind it, it didn't need much fall in elevation or rise in elevation. It just moved straight towards him. So he didn't see it because it was just a dot that all of a sudden popped in between the eyes. And of course, they backtracked the hell out of there. I've been to this pond with him and went over. That's where we have to decide, is this guy credible? I mean, I can tell you that I believed him just for the mere fact that while he was telling me this story down at Honubby, he had his wife there and his stepson there. So if he was hoaxing me with a story, they had to be involved in it, and so that means they had to talk it through and be a part of the hoax, which seems to travel a couple of hours from Oklahoma City down there just to talk to somebody about a Bigfoot or a Bigfoot behavior. It seemed pretty extreme to go that far for something that wasn't true. So for that aspect alone, I didn't see any red flags. He and I became instant friends. I spent the night at his place. I've gone to his mother's house, which is not too far from there. Uh, Camped on the same creek where he had things happen there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this, where one time he was camping, and here's the end of the road there where you have to walk in or ride a four-wheeler. So you can see the creek back in here, the creek that runs along through that wildlife management area. And somewhere on this creek, he was there one night with another gentleman, and I also knew this other gentleman. So I heard his side of the story. And indeed, they did see something in this creek that jumped up out of the creek. And they both described it as appearing to be a juvenile sized Sasquatch or Bigfoot that was in the creek and jumped up about a 4 or 5 foot bank. And it said that it just jumped up out of the creek and cleared it, just jumped up and took off. And so they went over to where they saw this thing jump up out of the creek. And well, first of all, here's what they saw. I drew these with Dave's permission, and he said it very closely resembles what they saw. So you can see on the left here, the Bigfoot squatting down and jumping up, jumping up. And when it jumped up, the pressure that it put on the ground jumping up was extra G forces. So it's not like something walking along the dirt and leaving tracks, but when it jumped, it exerted G forces because it needed to propel itself from the bed of the creek up, 5 foot. So that means it was probably two or three, maybe more G forces within those two footprints. So when they went over there, they saw these two footprints. So I pulled some footprints up for Dave to examine to give me any indications of what he saw there. Now, these are tracks that I pulled from the 400 location, and he said it did resemble maybe that center track. He said it did have a humanistic traits to it. It didn't look like the one on the far right, which is very wide and robust. He said they were narrow, almost human-like. So that falls into line with the kind of tracks that Shane has been tracking for years at the 400. So there you have that. And where this happened was, uh, just outside of Meeker Lake in Oklahoma. And the my friend David, I even tried to get him involved in a project that I was involved in 2015 because of his tracking ability. We are trying hard to get him to come in and do some more filming with us, so he can be a part of the documentary that we're doing now. He's very likable, very knowledgeable, a woodsman, and I mean, he knows what he's talking about, and very credible, very credible. But this could be the first time that you might have ever heard of someone getting hit between the eyes with probable, a probable Bigfoot throwing the rock. From where I showed you it happened, from the story around what happened, and the aggressiveness that Dave was attributing or contributing towards his family, his wife and children. Could the Bigfoots have seen that as a possible aggression thing that they might have needed to put an end to it? I mean, that's something that's interesting to have to think about. Just the fact that the circumstances around him getting hit with a rock and what he was doing at the time could, you've heard stories of Indians and Native Americans saying that, these are our brothers, our protectors, watchers in the woods. Could this be an instance where they were protecting those two boys and his wife from an overly aggressive situation? It sure seems that way. Well, that's all I got for you. I know this was a short one, but it is extremely interesting, and it gives you something to chew on. as far as behaviors. But anybody around the Meeker area that has spent time in the wildlife management area, back in there below and behind Meeker Lake, reach out to me. I'd love to hear if you've been back there and had anything happen. All right. Thank you.